Bluegrass Airport is an American aviation story. Its remarkable history has been chronicled through a series of oral history interviews. We are speaking with Arlynn McMahon, the 2009 National Flight Instructor of the Year and the recipient of the 2010 National Air Transportation Association Excellence in Pilot Training Award. She is co-owner of Aerotech, a flight training school at Bluegrass Airport. Arlynn, when did you first realize that you wanted to be a pilot?
Oh my goodness. I first got the bug to fly at a very young age. My grandmother lives about 2 miles from the airport, and as a child I would ride my bicycle along Parker's Mill Road and always would find myself on the back side of the airport. One day when I was coming up to the airport, a girlfriend and I riding on our bicycles, there was a man out there washing his airplane, and I was the kid sticking my fingers through the fence, you know, hey mister, I'll help you wash your airplane if you take me for an airplane ride. And he said yes, and so I did, and he did, and we did, and it was a great time. It was probably several weeks or months later, something came up at home. What do you want for your birthday? And I said, I think I'd like to learn to fly. And nobody in my family had any inkling about airplanes. I was the first to have any concept of airplanes. They said, no, I'm sure you're too young, and pretty much led me to believe that they had forgotten about it. Well, unbeknownst to me, my dad actually went to the airport and evidently did some searching around and research, you know, as good dads do. And sooner or later, for however it came to be, he decided to buy an airplane. He decided that that might be useful in his business. At the time, he owned a construction business and had several different sites all across the state. So he bought a Cessna 182, and lo and behold, he found this guy by the name of Charlie Minette to be his flight instructor. Well, a little bit more time went along, and as it turns out, you have to go to ground school. And back then, there was really no place at Bluegrass Airport to hold a classroom-style ground school. So Charlie was actually teaching ground school in the basement of his house. So my dad, twice a week, would go to Charlie's house in order to learn the ground academic subjects. And one night I was bored, didn't have anything to do, and I said, can I go with you? And he said, well, sure. So I went to ground school, and I did better than my dad. And however it came to be, I don't know, I was young. My dad and Charlie worked it out so that I could come to ground school, and finished ground school, took the test, and passed it. So at least for the knowledge part, I had proven that I had an interest, but also that I was willing to work for it. And then kind of one thing led to another.
How old were you when you first went to ground school, and how long did it take you to solo?
I think I was probably 14 when I first started going to ground school. And I probably had my first flight lesson when I was 15. Did I mention I had a very handsome flight instructor? And it was a Cessna 152 he had, and we got to sit very close together in that airplane. So I liked that very much. And so we flew and did training all through my 15th year. And the idea being that I wanted to solo on my birthday. Now, when the time came to solo, I had far exceeded all the minimum requirements because I'd been in training for more than a year. But yet, on that day, of course, the pressures of performing, I couldn't do squat. My flight was terrible. I couldn't taxi right. I couldn't take off right. I couldn't do anything right. And I was so disappointed because I felt like I'd worked for so long for this day, and it wasn't going to happen because I couldn't do anything. So taxiing back in, it was a short taxi back then. The runway wasn't quite as long. But I remember turning my head like this because I didn't want my instructor to see me crying because I knew I wasn't going to get to solo. So we get back to the place, and he says, okay, go do it. And I was like, what? I can't fly today. I'm not worthy. And he said, yeah, you'll be fine. Go do it. So I did. I went and did it. And it was one of the greatest things in my life because it really does change you. So the first solo flight was really one of the greatest days of my life. It's one of those things that you remember because it changes you somehow to know that you can control this airplane by yourself. Is just very empowering as a person.
You have won recognition for your flight training. Tell us about that.
I have been very lucky. I have had a lot of opportunities to do a lot of neat things, and all of these things just kind of came together, which resulted in me doing the type of work that gets national recognition. And it was really as a result of the work that I had done and the national recognition that came with it that led to me being the 2009 National Flight Instructor of the Year. So it was a great honor, and I got to go to Oshkosh, where the FAA administrator actually presents the award. And then shortly after that, I also was the recipient of the 2010 National Air Transportation Association Excellence in Pilot Training Award. So those two have pretty much been the culmination of a lot of years of training and working, and I'm very proud of it.
Did you have any idols or mentors when you were younger?
At the time, I was the kid at the airport. And I was a bit of a sweet young thing, so that kind of opened a lot of doors. I had a lot of mentors, most all of which were the successful business pilots, whether they be instructors or charter pilots or just people coming and going through the military. But I really found that in the community as such, the aviation people are a different breed. And they help each other and protect each other and mentor each other. They're very close-knit, I think because they all have to go pretty much through the same types of experience to get to where they are. So I can't really point to one person because there were lots of people who helped. When you hear that it takes a community to raise a child, it kind of does take a community to raise a pilot.
Do you learn how to maintain an airplane when you become a pilot?
When you become a pilot, you really need to be, as much as possible, self-sufficient in assuring that you are ready to fly and also your airplane is ready to fly. Now, back in the good old days, that required a bit more duct tape than it does now. The airplanes are made with better materials. We've just got better processes for manufacturing airplanes. I haven't seen any duct tape on airplanes for quite a while. Back then, yeah, I learned to change a tire. I learned to change the oil. I learned to change a battery, and that was just what you did as a pilot. These days, not so much. These days, we're more into preventative maintenance so that hopefully you're not caught off guard having to do something. So these days, it's more about doing inspections in anticipation of perhaps something might fail and fixing it before it fails or before it becomes a problem, which is actually a much better way to do it.
Is there a connection between people who learn to fly and people who learn to parachute?
Well, the biggest correlation between people who learn to fly and people who learn to parachute is that there really is no correlation. After you spend a lot of money learning how to fly an airplane, you're more apt to stay in that airplane. For the most part, being a pilot, I kind of get offended if somebody doesn't want to land with me after they took off with me. The parachuters are a different breed. They're more of an extreme sport. Piloting is more of a thinking man's sport, which is a bit different personality, I think. It's not risk-taking at all. Parachuting probably is a bit more.
Did you want to learn to fly for the thrill of it, or was it the idea of mastering a complex process?
I think that I probably started to learn to fly because I was just really unsure about how the system worked. You see that great big airplane out there take off, and It just doesn't seem like it ought to be able to do that. And I had to learn how in the world this works. And then once I began to understand it, a certain respect comes from that. And then you really just think it's cool the way the whole system works, all of the physics behind it. Now, I think you do have to enjoy it if you're going to be good. Somebody said that if you enjoy what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I found myself really enjoying what I do to the point where it was no longer a line between I was doing it because I enjoyed doing it versus I was doing it because I was working at doing it. The only difference was once we started Aerotech, I could be at the airport for 12 hours a day instead of 4 hours a day. But that really wasn't work, and I still love to do it today. It's really not work, although some days are more pleasurable than others, especially regarding the weather. It's a good life. It's not really work. It's more like being a lifeguard at the beach. Not quite work. It's more like that.
How does weather impact flying?
Weather is a big part of learning to fly. In the beginning of new pilots training, we have to make sure they understand when they're able to fly, and the question is, can we fly? Now, as the pilot continues with his training, we sort of change the question a little bit. Rather than can I fly, it's how can I fly? Realizing that you might need to change the altitude or change the route or maybe change the time of departure. And then a little bit later we change the question again in do I want to fly? Meaning I have the skills, I have the know-how, but is it worthwhile? Is it what I want to do based on time and energy and effort and safety and everything that goes into making the decision? So weather is going to change how you think about flying and also what level of certification the pilot has. Now, as the pilot continues on with more training, he actually learns to fly in the weather. And then the whole concept of what is good weather versus what is bad weather, it changes a little bit.
How does wind speed impact flying?
Well, wind messes up my hair when I try to pre-flight the airplane. Wind scares the students sometimes in the early phase. You kind of have to force them into the wind to get the experience that they need to learn how to handle it so that they can become safe pilots. I tell my pilots sometimes, you might not enjoy the lesson today, but you'll be glad to have had the experience. Wouldn't you rather have me sitting next to you the first time you experience bad winds than to have your family there? And then once you learn how to handle the wind, then it becomes a matter of learning your personal limitations, what you like versus what you're able to handle, and then maybe some days you just don't go flying. One night, Charlie said something about flying in Alaska. And I said, what would it take for us to go to Alaska? And so the more we talked about it, the more we started thinking about it. And finally, in about an hour's time, we had taken all of the furniture out of Aerotech and pushed it up against the wall and had sectional charts laid all over the floor from end to end, 40, 50 feet of sectional charts. And a guy walks in and he says, what are you all doing? And I said, I'm trying to figure out how to go to Alaska. He said, when are you going? I said, June. He said, here's a check. Consider it a deposit. Let me know how much to write the balance. I turned to Charlie and I said, I think we're going to Alaska. He said, I think we are. And so it was just that easy to, boom, go from, I wonder what it would be like to, we're doing this. And so we spent the next year getting people together. We took 13 students in 3 airplanes all the way to Anchorage, Alaska. When we landed at Anchorage, the fixed base operator was Aerotech. So of course we had to exchange business cards because that was just too funny. But we had a lot of very good flying experiences for the pilots that went. We still stay in touch with a lot of those pilots, and a trip like that, you know, was just the trip of a lifetime. So that was quite a successful story, I think.
Talk about the fastest learner you've ever had.
We have had the pleasure of having many military contracts for flight training. We have taught a lot of people who would leave Aerotech then and go on to officer training or combat training. These are the best of the best. These young men are dedicated. They are very, oh my goodness, just not quite mortal, you know. These fellas really put in all of the effort so that the instructor's job becomes quite easy. Whenever I have the opportunity to train somebody that I know is going into the military, I always acknowledge the work that it took for them to get there and know that this is going to be a very good student. And they will normally complete all the requirements in right about the minimum time, which is unheard of in the general population. But because of their motivation, because they are the best of the best, they do a good job. So those were probably my most memorable times of really, truly awesome natural pilots. Not natural in their abilities, but because they just had natural work ethic and motivation.
Have you ever had to give up trying to teach a student to fly?
Oh my goodness. There are some people who would be better off taking up knitting. But I feel like as an instructor, it's my job. If somebody has the motivation and the desire, as long as they're willing to work for it, I will work for them. Now, I normally have to sit down and have a heart-to-heart talk with them because I probably gave them some estimate of cost and some estimate of time. And when I see that there's no natural ability there, that's probably going to change. But provided we have that open discussion about cost and energy and requirements, if they decide that they still want to do it, then I'm going to be there for them. I'm going to teach them as long as they want to be taught, because that's the job of an instructor. Yes, I have had several students who I've said, you have no natural ability. Now, I didn't say those words. I was very kind and gentle, but still clear in what the message had to be. And ultimately, though, I try to make it their decision. The only ones that I have had to fire are the ones who are probably not responsive or respective of regulation, or not responsive or respective of safety procedures. I have fired more customers for that than because they just had no ability. It really is a discipline that requires a certain procedures be followed in order for it to be safe. It's only going to be fun if it's safe. And so if they're not willing to follow our safety procedures, you know, that's a showstopper.
Arlynn, talk about commercial versus general aviation.
There are two kinds of people in aviation. The people who are enamored about the airplane itself. They want to go faster, they want to go higher, they want something slick and shiny. Those people are more apt to become airline pilots. The second group of people in aviation are the people who enjoy the people side, because pilots are such a unique group. Those people are more likely to go into general aviation. These people who make up this community, they're normally very self-aware of their own limitations, and that's somewhat humbling, I think. But that doesn't mean that they're not without a great deal of personal confidence. Not that they're egotistical, but just able to get the job done. So when you're around a group of people who know themselves and who know their own limitations, this really opens the door for a different kind of relationship than what you would find just out in the general population on Facebook or on Twitter. You really learn about these people. So here at Bluegrass Airport, what we have is a collection of people who have come from all different walks of life. Some of them are ex-military, some of them are ex-airlines, some of them come from all of the different states, but they all have that one bond in common, and that is the love of flying itself and the people who make up the aviators. Now, as a result, this turns into pretty much a family atmosphere where we really do try to look after each other, and sometimes that's a bit of tough love. You know, if you care about somebody and you see them, what you think, going down the wrong path, you are going to say something to them. And most of the time, these people will acknowledge it and they will say, thank you, which is very different, I think, than what you would find in the normal population. Those people would probably get their backs up. And here at Bluegrass Airport, I think being somewhat in the South, somewhat gentility is the key. People are very polite when they say, you're going to do what? And so as a result, yeah, it's just a different kind of place. It's different than any place else that you'd find in Lexington. But as far as airports go, it's just got a unique mix of people, I think. All the gentility without the grits.
When did you and Charlie get married?
We were married 5 years ago. I didn't want to rush into anything. I think that our relationship has changed a lot from student and instructor to mentor, not only in the airplane, but just in life. Then employer and employee. And then it settled into pilot and co-pilot. And the thing that I knew was going to be successful about it was when we are able to change those roles so easily. Some days I'm the pilot and he's the co-pilot, and other days the roles are transitioned. So when you have two people, I think, who can transition those roles so seamlessly, I think it speaks well of a good marriage, because that's pretty much the way marriages work, I think, is when you can change those roles. But I have to tell you about the proposal, because it was very special. Not only are we pilots, but we're also avid sailors. And so we were on the bow of the boat. Oh, wait a minute, I should back up a little bit. Because we were on the boat, and Charlie says, let's go to the bow. I said, oh, hold on a second. If I'm going to put on my bathing suit, I better shave my legs. So I go down and keep the poor man waiting. Come back up, and he says, are you ready to go to the bow of the boat now? And I said, well, hold on a second. I probably should get some sunscreen, because I'm very fair and likely to get sunburn. So I kept the man waiting again, and so finally, after about 4 or 5 tries, we finally go to the bow. I just put my butt down on the deck, and he says, do you love me? And I'm like, what a strange question. After all these years, you should know the answer to that. So he pops open this big shiny ring, and it was just glistening in the sun. And he said, the only way you get free jewelry is if you marry me. And at that moment, you know how the dolphins will jump on the bow of the boat? Dolphins came out of nowhere and were jumping out of the boat. It was like, wow, it's going to be okay. Yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do. So that was the proposal. And then we flew back home. After being in business for so long, we had a lot of people who wanted to be in attendance of the wedding. And so we figured about the only way we're going to be able to get married without going broke was to have a wedding out of town. So we had it in Panama City Beach, and we told everybody, you are welcome to come, but you have to come to Panama City Beach. And oh, by the way, the dress is thongs, sarongs, or shorts. So right away, we separated the true friends from the not so true friends. And so we got married on the beach at sunset. And guess what happened right at sunset? The dolphins were jumping. So it was very romantic.
Do you have any opportunities to teach children about aviation?
We have a lot of chance to get in front of children. I was one of the first people who organized the Girl Scouts. We had 200 Girl Scouts on a very rainy day, which pretty much packed Aerotech. And when the museum started up, I had already been doing what I called flight camps. And these were opportunities for the kids to come to the airport, and I would try to give them exposure to the many different aspects of aviation. But it had gotten so big, and really I was not able to handle it, either because of the size of the facility of Aerotech or the staff of Aerotech. So when the museum came along, We solicited the museum to take over the flight camps for us. But we still do the flight portion. Each flight camp that the museum does includes a flight. Also, we generally provide an instructor to go over and do like a careers information. We're very involved with the school systems doing careers day type talks. We've provided a lot of curriculum activities to a lot of the second grade, third grade type teachers for just introducing the concept of aviation in their general sciences type study. We sponsor a Eagle Scout, usually once a year or so. We do a lot with the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts for just an awareness of what aviation is. When you make a pilot, you're not just teaching them how to control the airplane, but you're making aviation citizens. When you think about what it means to be a citizen in the community, it's the same type stuff. You want somebody who's mature and responsible and helping one another. And so this is what we try to instill in all of our pilots, and it's what we try to explain to the kids. When you become a pilot, you should have these traits. So many of the traits that is required to be a good pilot aren't necessarily taught in the school systems. So we have to make sure that the kids don't have any illusions of what it takes to be a good pilot so that they can make some good decisions. And I think that becoming a pilot actually makes the kid a better person when he's able to learn personal accountability and responsibility. Those are huge. And we probably have 20 or 30 kids, probably under the age of 17, learning to fly at Aerotech at any given time. And now lots of times these are the children of pilots that we taught back years ago, and so this will be second or sometimes even third generation. I guess that makes me a grand instructor, doesn't it? But the kids is an important part of what we do because it's the next generation of pilots. We actually have a really cool device at Aerotech, which is a full motion simulator. Now this is not a tabletop game that you might be familiar with, but it actually takes up a whole room about the size of this room. It's like a simulator that the airlines would use or that the military would use. So many times we found that the programs that we had installed for the children, there became liability issues with taking them for flights or parental questions and perhaps concerns. So with the simulator now, we can actually give them the full feel of flying without actually putting them in the airplane. So that's been a big plus for us to be able to have those kids be able to have at least the feel for it, even though it's not the real thing. It kind of maybe gets them excited about it.
Any other things you would like to talk about?
One of the things that I would like to talk about is the importance of general aviation to the aviation industry and in specifically to Bluegrass Airport. Now the unique thing about Bluegrass Airport is somehow the airport managers seem to always know this. You know, commercial airlines, they come and go, but general aviation is usually made up of the pillars of our community. They're here, they're solid, they're stable. At times when the airport maybe does not have all the funding that it needs, it will normally be the community pillars that bring about the programs and opportunities to have development at the airport. And so when times are good, the airlines are here, life is okay, but it always falls back on general aviation when times are bad. And I think that's one of the reasons why Bluegrass Airport has been successful is because they have acknowledged the importance of general aviation, and general aviation has pulled through at times when funding wasn't so good in order to kind of stabilize things. And I think that that's one of the concepts that a lot of people really don't think too much about. But there is a relationship there between general aviation and the air carriers and general aviation and airport management. And the fact that we're able to own hangars, own property at the airport is key to that development. And I'm glad to see us getting back to that point again.